Bienvenidos, señoras, señores. África y América Latina comparten mucho en común históricamente, pero existe un vacío inmenso y un desconocimiento mutuo entre estos dos espacios debido a la insuficiencia, o mejor dicho, a la falta de proyectos de intercambio entre ellos. Las impresiones que uno tiene del otro son basadas en lo que la autora nigeriana Chimamanda Adichie llama el peligro de la versión única, The Danger of a Single Story, que termina caricaturizando una realidad compleja. Con la edición de 2021 del programa llamado La Literatura Hoy, que organiza la Biblioteca Luis Ángel Arango con autoras y autores africanos, planteamos que los intercambios a nivel literario pueden contribuir a un mejor entendimiento de las relaciones entre las realidades de nuestros dos continentes. Hoy tenemos el placer de lanzar este programa con Joyce Ash, autora camerunesa que vive en Estados Unidos. ¿Quién es Joyce Ash? Joyce Ash es poeta, actriz, narradora, profesora de literatura en la Universidad de Hartford, Estados Unidos. Joyce ha contribuido a múltiples antologías de poesía como Peace for Africa, Peace for Kurdistan, a Wales Cameroon Anthology en 2018, Poems for the Hazara en 2014, Reflexiones, una antología de nuevas obras de mujeres poetas africanas en 2013. Sus poemas han sido traducidos en griego, hebraico, turco, árabe y en muchas otras lenguas. Es ganadora de Kathrak-Bangladesh Literary Award en 2018 y del premio de la Asociación de Literatura Africana en 2021 con su poemario Beautiful Fire, publicado por la editorial Spies Media en 2018. Los temas principales en las obras de Joyce Ash son la paz, la violencia, el cuerpo, la cultura popular, la relación entre tradición y modernidad, la condición femenina, la migración y muchos otros asuntos que le preocupan en su poesía. Joyce Ash, you're highly welcome to this event.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yes, so it's our pleasure to have you for the very first interview within the framework of Literature Today, organized by the library Luis Ángel Arango from Colombia. It's a pleasure to always talk to you because we've had interactions before. And when one looks at your collections, there is a recurrent image of, of fire, of flames. Your first collection of poems that is entirely authored by yourself, A Basket of Flaming Ashes. There's still that image of flames and ashes and fire. And in your most recent and award-winning collection, Beautiful Fire, of course. So these recurrent images of fire, and again, you actually belong to a theater group called Flame Players. So what is this romance with flames and fire? What does it connote? Is it a kind of radicalism? Is it what you want to do with your poetry? Is it a kind of destructive or deconstructive poetry?
Well, let me first start by just thanking the initiation, the organizers and those who initiated this this encounter. I am glad that we are making these bridges between communities, and I thank you for being a bridge builder. That you went to Colombia, and you are now linking Colombia and Cameroon. And Africa at large. So thank you. Now going to your question about the titles of my work, A Basket of Flaming Ashes, Beautiful Fire. Let me say that there's something subconscious going on here. First, my middle name is Batwa. Batwa in Kenyan, my ethnic language is Ash. And maybe I am channeling that, but I find ash and fire very interesting. There's a way in which it could be constructive, there's a way in which it could be destructive. And I play with that because that is what life is. It depends on which angle you are watching. So when I look at, when you look at ash, in fact, I am reminded of an enigmatic phrase in Things Fall Apart that bothered me when I was in secondary school, where Okonkwo is looking at the fire and then he now has an idea. He says, wow, living fire begets cold, impotent ash. He could now understand why he had a child like Moye. He was called the fiery flame, and he has a son that is so cold. Now he says, wow, this flame, it's okay, can produce ash. But I don't see ash like that as important. Ash is not important. As you know, on the continent, we use ash as a healing element. You know, there's a lot of ethnic medicine that has ash in it. So I don't see ash as important. I see ash as something, it has a healing quality to it. The fact that it was fiery before, you know, so I play with that. So when I say beautiful fire, flaming ash, there is that kind of not diabolic, but very challenging, complex, complicated relationship, and I play with that.
Very important, explanation, and of course, most of the elements, the basic elements of nature are ambiguous. They can, they can actually be very creative and positively with a positive connotation, but they can also be destructive. And talking about fire, I mean, I discovered that you also lay a lot of emphasis on other elements. You know, air. Your poetry is a breathing poetry. And this brings me to an assertion by an African author whom I know you are familiar with, Sonny Labutangsi, who considered writing to him as breathing, as a kind of existential, endeavor, which was equal to living and breathing. And again, another element apart from fire and air in your work is water. And you have a poem in Beautiful Fire in Pidgin English, which is one of the, the main lingua francas, on the African Western coast, especially by English-speaking communities, countries there. Wata na life in Pidgin. Yeah, so, I mean, is your poetry, in spite of the fact that your poetry is very much lively, I mean, there's a social critique and social, sarcasm, in their poetry. There is also this very serious preoccupation with life. I mean, how do you combine this, some sort of, Nietzsche would call it gay science. I mean, like, using being both serious and playful at the same time, this preoccupation with life,
I like the fact that you bring this aspect of breathing, because to me, that is what it is. When I write my poetry, it's because I can't breathe in one aspect or the other. It could be just something happens in Cameroon and it's bothering me, like when the bridge broke, the main bridge leading the Douala to Yaoundé highway. That's the main highway, and people died. And I'm just sitting here, I can't breathe, I write. When the poem on the Hazara, I hear about what is going on there, and I'm looking at this magazine and I see this little child, just standing forlorn, and life it chokes me, and then I write. And so there are many ways in which when I'm actually looking for air, whether as a woman, a wife, a mother, an African, or just a human being, my state of being is permanently under attack. My state of being is permanently under attack. And when I respond to poetry, I tell people I don't write poetry because I want to publish books. No, it's just, it's a way that I free what is trapped inside me. I have to exhale. So when I exhale poetry, then I write I write poetry. And the truth about it is that just like the light-hearted things, when I want to laugh, when I'm happy, when I want to play, I also play with poetry. And that's when I enjoy moving the words around, bringing some images here, toying with people, and so I like that image. For me, writing is breathing.
Thanks very much. I mean, your explanation equally reminds me of what Ngugi wa Thiong'o once said, that, the level of commitment of African authors meant that they had to focus on the serious things of life. I mean, on politics, which means that he says when they were growing up, the dreams of writing poetry about love, texts that were like Romeo and Juliet, love stories, but the very exigent social political conditions never gave them that allowance. But here you are, a poet who succeeds, in writing about love, in writing about, social realities in a lighter mode, but at the same time, you are very committed, like you still have this strong commitment to life, to the defense of life in your poetry. So I find that quite interesting. Now, you mentioned you are...
Can I just talk about that? You see, there is this misconception that love is fun, love is safe. No, when I write about love, my love poetry is protest poetry. Because as an African woman, I was brought up not to see myself as an independent being. I was just seen as a reproduction vehicle. I was only effective as a wife, as a mother. I can't be romantic, So when I write my love poetry, I'm writing in protest. I'm saying I own my voice. I can talk about the things that are good for me. I can say that I am in love and I'm not ashamed of it. So in fact, in talking about our human body, our wishes, our hopes and dreams, it was taboo. A woman can be talking about her sexual drive and stuff. So for me, when I write about that, it's my resistance. It's saying that I have a voice to speak and I'm going to speak. So people may see that as romantic love poetry, but for me, they don't know the energy it takes to put certain things down. Like in a poem like Blunt, where I'm talking about a toy, using of a toy. That is taboo. That is for somebody who was raised a Christian. How dare me write about that and publish it? So it takes a lot of guts. It takes a lot of energy. So my love poetry is actually part of my protest poetry.
And that is exactly where the very image of fire, of this deconstructive element, in in the breadth of your poetic oeuvre actually comes to the fore. I mean, the way you talk about sexuality, and I must say that you walk a very tightrope there. Your poetry is erotic without being obscene, which means that it provokes it, it puts to question, but it's not what one could call frivolous poetry, as some African authors have indulged in. But so that's something that I find quite important in your work, being erotic, and eroticity has come to the fore as a very important element of decolonial studies. The erotic, the potency of the erotic, in redefining social relations, in a particular space. So that is quite interesting in your in the whole breadth of your work. And Joyce, looking at your trajectory, I must say that you've been a major personality in your, I mean, not only in your home country, but you've cut across even the continent. And even when you migrated to the US, you still made your mark, in the public sphere in several domains. So, but I would say that where you are best known in your home country, at least, is in the domain of theater, which characterizes your trajectory even from secondary school to the university. As I earlier said, you belong to, a theater club known as the Flame Players. So one would have expected you to, of course, I know you did a film. I mean, you actually, have also done film, but where you want to put your mark, on the on the footsteps of the literary scene, it's actually in poetry. What is peculiar in poetry that cannot be achieved through other genres? What has poetry, done to you, or what have you done to poetry that, poetry is your main form of literary expression and not theater, which was your...
Well, you're going to make me to do a confession here. It's not my wish. Poetry is a genre that has come in handy for me for the past several years because of being away from home, being a mother. Writing stories takes time. Writing a novel takes time. And but what I realize is that I'm still a performer. Anybody who reads my poem and hears me or sees me read it sees a big difference between reading of the poem and my performing it, which makes it, performance is still central to my writing. What I may tell you right now is that I consider myself a storyteller, whether in theater, whether as a short story writer or as a poet. That's why each time I'm reading my poems, I have to tell a story of how the poem came about. And I tell stories, and I don't want to believe that I have written my epitaph yet. So I wouldn't say that my legacy is poetry. I'm hoping that by the time I'm done, I'll come back home to theater. But what I want to say is that I see myself as an actress, as a performer. That's who is inside me. And even when I write my poetry, I think that there's a certain thrust of theater in that, which is why performance is central to it. So why I am not at the forefront of theater right now, it's just one of those things in life. And as you know, in Cameroon, we didn't even have a theater department. We had it as a minor. I wanted to do theater arts. Maybe I should just tell the little story here. I wanted to do theater arts. I applied to go to the University of Ibadan. And that September, my parents died tragically in a car accident. So instead of going to Ibadan, I ended up going to the University of Yaoundé. And when I graduated, I still wanted to do theater arts. I applied to do theater arts in England. I was given a scholarship for librarianship, so which I did. But I have continued making sure that performance is not far from what I do. And even as a professor, my teaching methodology is embedded in African theater practice, where the audience and the actor collaborate for the performance. So in terms of education, they will say student-centered teaching. But I draw that student-centered teaching not from some educational theory, but from African participatory theater. So as you see, theater still informs informs what I do.
That's quite important because it also shows the way your poetry, imbricates or some sort of involves other genre. Usually the mainstream thinking is that the novel is is the typical genre that permits, the kind of it compresses other genre, into its corpus, so you can do theater, you can do poetry in the novel, but your poetry actually shows that you can also incorporate performance into it. And again, a very interesting dimension of your poetry is that there's also a narrative poetry. You also write narrative poetry. Yes. So I think, yes.
If I may cut you, you notice if most of the time when I'm doing my poetry with a crowd, I'm always giving a line to the crowd. There's something that they say, I do call and response, and all that is coming from theater, because as you know, most Western poetry, it's silent, you stand, but our poetry is involved, it's involving, it includes the audience. And I make sure that I include the audience in my poetry, which is why most people always tell me that anyone who reads my poetry without watching me or seeing it performed is cheated.
Yeah, that's the truth. I mean, I must say I've also watched you, do poetry presentation performance, and it's quite interesting. And it's quite, what do you talk about when you talk about the fact that poetry to you is breathing, and this concern for humanity. And by virtue of being a global citizen, I discovered that once you are rooted, in the happenings of your homeland and the cultural practices of your homeland, but of course you are also a globetrotter. You are also a citizen of the world, and that can be seen specifically, in a number of poems, actually, in Beautiful Fire, where you engage with happenings, tragic happenings, in spaces, far away, either in your country, your host country in the US, but also in countries, far-fetched, countries that sometimes we don't even hear about. And this is why your poem, A Defiant Face, spoke to me quite personally. And I want you to read that poem for us, for the audience, A Defiant Face, for Hazara people. You would explain to us the circumstances under which that poem was born. That is on page 56 of Beautiful Fire.
Yes, I am originally from English-speaking Cameroon, like you. We are a minority, and we grew up feeling small in our own country. We grew up feeling dispossessed. And so I have a heart for other minorities. And so when I found out about what was happening to the Hazara people, it touched me. And I had a friend who said, Joyce, could you write a poem about this? And I said, at the time, I had not known about the Hazaras. But when I read about them, I felt touched. And the magazine that I was reading had a picture of a little girl. And so I wrote this poem looking at that picture. I looked as I was describing the picture I was seeing. And it is her face that I label A Defiant Face, a poem for Hazara people. Near Siachop village, your face sings a defiant song. Hazara, Hazara, Hazara. And the refrain echoes in octaves. From Kawat, through Chade, from Mirasi Valley to Mbanyam. Your mismatched shoes are the arrows for the tiny bows. No one can steal your sun. No winter can cheat your dreams. For the waters of Lazir River have found my flaming pen. I may never know your name, but the language of your face is my grenade on their parade. The language of your face is my grenade on their parade.
Thank you so much, Joyce. This is one of the most moving poems for me in that collection. As you know, we've engaged on this collection before, and this is the poem that spoke to me most eloquently in this collection. Because I'm also a student of decolonial studies, and the language of the face is very important. What does the face of the other mean to you? And that is also something that is very, it's a, decolonial studies are also very common in Latin America, and we also have authors like Walter Mignolo, Nelson Maldonado Torres. And so the language of the face, which is something which also Frantz Fanon also engages in his works. Emmanuel Levinas engages in his works equally. The language of the face of the other, even if you don't know that face. And, it's not even that the face is legible to you, but that face becomes a moral, ethical interpellation of your own humanity. I think I found that quite important really, really striking in your work. Can you maybe expatiate on that, like the fact that you engage with the face of the other? And again, the image of the face comes out in most of your poems, the face to face, not in a confrontational way, but actually in terms of engagement, engaging. Yes.
Because I am a poet of feeling. I'm a poet of feeling. You have to feel to write poetry. So when I look at a face, when I look at the physical body, what is it telling me? Sometimes what it's telling me, the body is not even aware of what it's telling me. It's not aware. It did not intend to communicate with me, but I am the one gleaning that communication. And that is because we all are part of one universe. And because we are part of one universe, because we are human beings, we don't have to be from the same place. I can see that face and it speaks to me. I can see the mismatched shoes and it speaks to me. And these are the poems when my fire comes out because I get enraged. I am filled with, some people may think it's destructive fire. No, it's the beautiful fire, which is ready to reclaim humanity, which is ready to see the other. I'm ready to kill. I'm ready to kill to build. You know, and when I say, you know, that face is my grenade on their parade, that means that face is charging me up. And that face may not have had that intention, but it is humanity speaking.
Exactly. Thanks, Joyce, for that wonderful explanation and, you know, that concept of radical pacifism in your work and the concern for shared humanity. Now, of course, you are a global citizen, but you are also anchored. And at the moment we are speaking, the country from which you and I come from is in crisis. That is to even put it euphemistically. It is at war, to put it, you know, much more frankly. Same as Colombia. Colombia is also going through crisis at the moment. So we are caught up in this world, you know, a world in crisis, not just because of the COVID-19, but you know the circumstances around the world. I mean, either in Latin America, even in the US, countries that we thought were like, you know, already safe havens for peace are also up in flames. So, but then let us go back to Cameroon. Now, our country is at war, and you are a writer, and you are not on the ground. You are in the diaspora. How do you engage with the current barbarity, you know, in which a country that was either erroneously or rightfully referred to as an island of peace now, you know, flares up in flames? How has that reality, you know, some sort of caught you as an author? I mean, do you some sort of feel important, or what are you doing? How has it conditioned your reflexes as an author?
I will tell you this, that at the beginning of the war, at the beginning of the crisis, especially when the young boys from Anglophone Cameroon took up arms, I know they were pushed to that level, and things really got out of hand. For the first time, we were seeing bodies, you know, every day, you know, casualties were mounting. I felt helpless. But I'm not Christopher Okigbo. I'm not trying to pick up arms and join anybody to fight. I think that I have found a space for myself, and that space is to bear witness. Somebody's got to tell. Like Chinua Achebe puts it, the story is our escort. You know, literature is our escort. When all is said and done, somebody has to tell what happened. And so I have decided that my role during this time would be to be part of that collective recording of our people's story, how they're feeling, how they are negotiating. One thing about human beings is that no matter how dire the situation is, no matter how horrible the situation is, we are resilient. We are resilient. When I went to Colombia in 2012, before I came to Colombia, I had heard all sorts of stories. I thought that when I come there, I wouldn't see people laughing, enjoying, and stuff. But people are resilient. The people of Colombia are resilient. The people of Cameroon are resilient. The people of Anglophone Cameroon are resilient. And we are supposed to record that, the story of their struggle, of their suffering, of their death, but also of their resilience, you know. And so for me, I, as an author, I have chosen to bear witness to what is going on. To some of them on the ground, their voices have been clipped. I'm far away, my voice has not been clipped. So I'm going to use that voice for them. I'm far away, nobody has taken my pen. So I'm going to use that pen for them. And that is how I doing that. That is why I co-edited this volume, Bearing Witness. This is the poetry collection. It came out in 2020. We are now working on the stories, short stories, and nonfiction, from collecting voices, from this war.
Thank you very much, Joyce. And that also shows how many caps you wear. You are not just writing, but you also are you are a confederating force. I mean, you are that person that brings people together, and this is something so peculiar about you as an author, but also as a person. And what you said is quite important because, as you rightly said about Colombia, you heard a lot of things about Colombia. You even thought that it was inhabitable altogether. I also, when I was going to Colombia, a lot of people were warning me against going to that country. They thought it was a war front, and some people even pitied me, but here we are. We need to build these bridges. We need to connect these two continents that are victims of a single story, as Chimamanda says. So writing is also being able to bring, out the immediate faces of specific context, a specific reality. So I think that's what comes out of it very much clearly in your poem. And then talking about that, I mean, we've talked about war, but also we talk about, the lighter side of life. So, and this comes out very clearly in your work, the engagement with popular culture, with music, with
soccer.
with soccer, with the public square. And this is something that unites you and me. I must say that I recently published the radio and other stories, and I was very much encouraged by you because I see the way you represent the public sphere, popular culture, something subculture. Some people call it subcultures, but through your work, and that's what I also try to do through my work. I mean, like we see that there is an element of communal ethos that can be constructed through an engagement with popular culture, with those junctions that come out in your work, with those spaces with which we identify, and again, talking about the issue of the country at war, the way you use the popular culture in your work cuts across the Anglophone and Francophone divide.
Yes.
In your work, you see one sees references to musicians from the Francophone side. So it's in itself a confederative work. I mean, this is something I really admire about your work. So tell us more about, what do you think about the pertinence of popular culture in nation building?
The thing about being an academic and writing is that sometimes it's so divorced from what is going on from the popular culture, yet that is where we spend a lot of time. We are in it. We are part of it. So this, I am an interdisciplinary scholar. I don't like all these bridges that we build, and that is why I am very flexible, to get into highbrow culture, get into popular culture. But the poems I enjoy most are when I interact in pop culture, because that's where you meet the masses. You meet the masses. And I see myself, I hate to be boxed in, to be boxed in. Okay, I am a professor, I'm a PhD, so I don't say certain things. No. In fact, when I came to Colombia, one of my fond poems was Jabulani, which talks about the World Cup ball. And each time before I started that poem, I had to talk about Mila's encounter with Higuita. And all the audience used to get so excited and stuff. There's that shared joy that we have of soccer. And there's no way I would be in a soccer country like Cameroon and I can't write a poem, on that. There is no way I'll be in a country that every other house is an off-license, a drinking spot. And a lot of things happen there. And I wouldn't write a poem that captures somebody sitting there having a drink and thinking of a past love when he was still young. And so, to me, it's just being me, because I breathe through poetry, and music is part of my world, pop music. So why wouldn't I write about it? So
Thank you very much, and it's quite interesting. I mean, I'm also, following what you are saying with a lot of interest, because whenever I travel to Latin America, the connection football is also very interesting. Now, one could say superficial, but we can build on such, communal references. I mean, to get to know each other much better.
in fact, talking about that, sorry to cut you, the poem Jabulani is not a fun poem. It's a poem. It's a feminist poem. If you read it from
Please,
that,
could you read that for us? Could you read that for us?
Jabulani. So this is the name of the World Cup ball in 2010, and there were criticisms about the ball that it was very light and the players could not control it. And so once I heard that, I decided to write a poem, and as usual, put my own spin on it. A man is like a Jabulani, the World Cup ball. In a woman's arms, he jerks in spasms. Drowned in the moans of any vuvuzela, he does the Robert Greene and slips inside. Hard to contain, a Jabulani flies to arms of fans in stands, defying poise, skill, and control, or corner kicks from yearning hearts. It is not a question of referees or countless replays on a white screen. Some women already know what Adidas knows. A Jabulani is a Jabulani. Even the best sometimes miss. After all, every net has its holes.
Thank you very much for that beautiful poem, with full replete with connotations that every careful reader would find it really like pregnant with meaning. That's it. Okay, Joyce. I mean, I want us to go back to a point that we mentioned before, the question of love relations. I mean, the way you use language, to talk about sexuality. And that's also where most of the critics have labeled your poems or your poetry as feminist. A label which I accept, but with a pinch of salt, because your poetry is full of multiple perspectives. And usually I don't want to reduce an author, as you said, writing poetry is to be able to feel. And as Martha Nussbaum, a philosopher at the University of Hartford, says, literature, it's the ability to construct sympathy, across gender, across age, across race, across nations, across ethnicities. We cannot change these things, but we can be able to strive, to understand how the other feels. So I think your work is very rich, in inhabiting in several skins, across these various categories. So when you talk about femininity, I mean, like there's an element that the female genre is always usually on the underside, in sexual relationships and also in marriage, in matrimonial context. And so there's a preoccupation in your work with birth giving, the pains
the womb.
Of the womb, exactly.
Very
so your poetry is the poetry of the womb. And that is again what gives that visceral dimension to your poetry. It's the body speaking, so I wanted to elaborate on that aspect, that visceral dimension of, I mean, what made the Congolese writer said his works in general, be it poetry, theater, or novels, were written in what that way, skin that was cut into pieces. Yes.
Yeah,
So
it's the kind of thing. I live in a perpetual quarrel with myself as a woman being and as a human being. I will tell you something. Even as a young girl, I used to be very vocal. And my mother, who did not know anything about feminism or phallic symbols, but represented that, she knew what a woman, being a woman, meant to her. You know what she used to tell me? When I speak to her in very strong terms, she'll tell me that, if you knew you were coming to speak like this, you should have come with a penis. I mean, she put it that clear. So what she's saying is that says, it's like you can only talk like that if you have that. If you don't have that, it's like, welcome to our world of suffering. Welcome. So to me, the womb is it's a unique experience. And so if you look at the first poem, I'm going to read it. The first poem in Beautiful Fire, Birthday. This is when I wrote this poem after I gave birth to my first son, and it was cesarean section, and so many things are going on here. I'm immigrant, I'm away from home, and this is what I captured. I was asleep, son, when you came. You did not see my eyes nor hear my voice. When I held you, son, pain tattooed my body, and my nipple fumbled in your waiting mouth. I had no mother by me, as should have been, so no pepper soup to heal my bleeding womb. How can I tell you, son, the wings of love did not fly at first sight, that I was an alien in a foreign land, lost in the thicket of lonely tears. But son, in the cushion of my arm, you gulped a prayer from my heart. Now at 15, questions abound as manhood prances on the edge of the boy. But some truths you will never know. You were not born with a womb. And so I use the womb as a dividing line for me. If you're not with a womb, there's some things about this life that you would never know. And I think that says it for me, the way I see that space of, I don't even talk about motherhood, I use the womb.
Interesting. Yeah, that's really evocative of this poem. And when you were talking about the issue of your mom saying why, if you knew you were going to talk, like why not coming with it, it also brings me back to this to this passage in Things Fall Apart. I know you are also a great reader of Chinua Achebe.
Yes.
Where Achebe looks at Ezinma, his daughter, and her wisdom, the way she does things, and then says, "Oh, how I wish she were."
Yeah, she were a boy. Exactly. It's amazing that you say that. I had never looked at my mother's, that saying. She's echoing the same thing. What she's echoing is that you should have been a boy. If you're gonna, you're talking like a boy. You're presenting like a boy. You're presenting like a boy, and the way she used to say it, I could feel almost the pain in her throat. It's like, at this stage, she will not. She's worried for me.
Interesting. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, you really paint these situations. I mean, I would say the global preoccupations or the global issues linked to feminism, but you also talk so much about the women in local communities. And this is why I said your poetry is at the same time globalist, but also well anchored, in the community where you come from. As an off-the-cuff question, I mean, would you say that things have evolved the condition of the woman in rural communities, in the context, in Cameroon, for example, and perhaps much of Africa, has there been marked progress in that sense, or maybe you are not sure whether gains have been made in that light, whether...
The world is evolving. We make gains, we lose them, we gain. As you know, traditional African society, traditional Cameroon society, traditional Bayang society, where I come from, the woman had a lot of power. Yes, you had ethnic traditions that kept the woman down, but colonialism, Christianity took a lot from the African woman. When they talk of a working woman, the Bayang woman has always been a working woman. The Bayang woman did not sit at home and the husband went to the farm and she was a stay-at-home wife. No, that concept came with colonialism. You know that our mothers and fathers went together to work. They might have taken care of different crops, but they went to work. They went and came back, sun up, sun down. So colonialism came and we lost that. Especially those who move to the cities. The man works, you're staying at home, you have to do petty things. Education helped to give us a voice to talk and stuff. So there's gains been made because you have women like me now who can sing our own songs, record our own histories. But guess what? Christianity has taken a toll in the present and reclaimed women again. So now a lot of women are being imprisoned by Christianity. So this protest I talk about, that I want to talk about, feel free to talk about my sexuality. Christianity is clamping down on that. And some of the gains that we had made to claim traditional spaces that we can call our own, tradition has come again and is saying that's demonic. So there are many ways in which, yes, women are going to school more. But when we have things like war, when war comes, women suffer the most. So I would tell you that it's we gain, we lose, we gain, we lose, and that's why we have to continue fighting.
Thank you for really making the debate, which is usually looked at from a very simplistic point of view. I mean, you've made it quite complex, that there are elements in the traditional society that could even be termed to be more progressive,
Yes.
than the so-called, because sometimes the most conservative behavioral patterns come from those whom you think are educated.
Mm-hmm.
We have seen this not only in the sphere of female representation, but also in the sphere of politics, where the most I would say fascist point of view are held by people whom you thought could be the light in the society. We see this happening in the US currently. So Joyce, African authors have struggled with labels, with self-definitions. Who are you? I mean, how do you define yourself? Are you an African author, an Afro-diasporic author? Are you an African author in exile? Are you an Afropolitan author? So there are several nomenclatures, several trends that have come up, and each has its own baggage of connotations, and other new ones come up to deconstruct. So, I mean, looking at your trajectory, how do you define yourself?
In fact, I'm all that you have named in different ways. And so to me, it's perspective. And I present myself differently in different spaces. But there are a few things that define me now. I would always say I'm originally from Cameroon. I also identify as an American now. I've been here for a quarter of a century. So that is long. And my ancestors who came here have made it in such that I have lineage here. I have my Black lineage here. So I identify as that also. And you talked about an author in exile. I feel like that very strongly. And it's not, maybe with the war in Cameroon, that has even increased, but I felt that way before. And I remember in another interview, I was saying that when you read my poetry, you see nostalgia. You see that the ties that I have back home. You talked about straddling not just Anglophone Cameroon, French Cameroon. That is part of nostalgia. If I was at home, there's some things that I would not tolerate. And there's a poem that captures that. I have a poem in my first collection titled Mfugu. Mfugu is a song that was written by, I don't know whether it's written by her, but she sang the song Rosie Bush. Wonderful song, a Bikutsi song. And for many years while I've been abroad, I was looking for that song. I loved it. Finally, somebody gave it to me. And that day I wrote a poem. And in an interview elsewhere, I explained that an Anglophone Cameroon writer in Cameroon would not be writing a poem about a Bikutsi song, because Bikutsi represents oppression. Represents it reminds them of the president of the country who has been running it for over 3 decades. And so they don't see it that way. But when I am in the United States, I'm looking at that as with nostalgia. I have missed it. And then when I write the poem is not just a question of, it has nothing, in fact, to do with the Bikutsi, so to speak, as nostalgia. Let me just read this. It's called Ufugu. I have listened to it 15 times already. What was there in my voice that sent you searching? How did you see beyond my now to reach my exiled soul? I ride the rhythm into the Atlantic. Like slaves of old, the waves lead me, a return trip to ancestral shores. Shoulders tell in back and forth motions the story of the Soso Bala and Akomamba's gyrating children. I stamp the ground and my cry beckons from the belly of Balafons. My self-exile is a map I don't draw. And so I miss home. I'm away from home. I'm aware of it. When deaths happen in the family and you can't come, when you hear about the war going on and your people are dying every day, you feel removed. It's not political exile. Nobody pushed me out. But you feel exiled from the land of your birth, from the land of my birth. I feel exiled.
Thank you very much, Joyce. And your very encompassing and insightful response also leads me to you feel exiled. But again, you said you are in a space where there's a lineage. You are in a space where you have the very rich tradition of Afro-American history. And I know you are, as a teacher, as a lecturer, you've also engaged quite much with that history. You know, you actually teach that literature. And I want us to just zoom in quite briefly on an issue which, it has preoccupied many authors from the domain of history, literature, the relationship between what Ali Mazrui, the African political scientist and intellectual, calls the African American, the Michelle Obama and her lineage, and then the American African, which, you and Obama actually can fall under that category. The relationship has not always been that cordial, but then how do you perceive that rapport, that kind of it's quite ambiguous. There's at one point there's identification of Blackness, but also the differences in history also sometimes causes lack of understanding. And Mukuma Ngugi's son, who is also an author, has engaged quite frontally with this debate. I also want to see to have your take on that. This ambiguous relationship.
I approach it from a very basic angle. I find that people who argue or quarrel is more from ignorance, and I've met African Americans who want to put us on a trajectory of civilization and say, okay, you are less civilized, I'm more civilized because I've been out here longer. I have those who misunderstand what we call continental Africans because they don't know our backgrounds, So you may think I'm less civilized, but you don't know that my parents studied in England. There's a way in which I am more worldly. I grew up with European letters. I grew up the same way like a child in England grew up, with the same nursery rhymes and stuff. In fact, but I'm not even proud of that because I learned that I lost a lot in learning that. But so I don't even engage in that polemic. This is the way I dealt with it. After a few years in the United States, especially when I started teaching African American literature. If you see the board behind me, it's a Black History Month celebration. It's a celebration, words like trees, that I put together, I created for my students, and we presented works, excerpts of works by African American writers and leaders. And through teaching African American literature, I became very aware of the history. I became very aware of my ancestors who came here. And something dawned on me one day that I can imagine in their pain, in their suffering. A lot of them did not even know how far away they were from home. They didn't even know where they were. I just imagine they were wondering whether they would be found, whether their relatives would come for them. Have they noticed that they are missing? They did not know how far they were. And so I'm just thinking that, hey, I am one of those relatives that have come. I am one of those that they were waiting for. So that's how I see myself. And if I am one of those relatives from the continent that has made her way to America, I am not coming to quarrel with my relatives. You know, Baldwin, when he met Achebe for the first time, said that the idea, someone did not want you and me to meet. It's someone's idea that we should not meet because they don't want us to be together. I am not going to fall for that. So I don't care, you know, I push those arguments when I meet. All I do is that I have come and I'm going to do my part to lift my relatives. I'm going to join them. And so I don't see myself, yes, in one aspect, I'm from the continent. We call ourselves continental Africans, but in another aspect, I'm just a continuation of the lineage of Kunta Kinte, and I'm proud of it, you know.
This is quite interesting, Joyce, because what you've said about you in the space of North America, I in one of my books, A Letter from America, actually, I write a poem. I write a poem when I arrive Peru. I write a poem, and when I encounter Afro-Peruvians, it's interesting because I never read that. I mean, that quote that you just mentioned, but I wrote a poem to say somebody didn't want us to meet, but here we are.
Oh, really?
Yes, actually, it's
wow.
part of A Letter from America. You won't believe it. Yes, and I had that same feeling when I spent time in Colombia and worked in harness with Afro-Colombians in the Pacific region in particular through my creative literature workshops. And so it was quite interesting that I also engage with them from that perspective of here are two brothers, two sisters that were separated by history, but here we are meeting. And I equally thank the authorities of, yes, exactly. You have the book with you.
It's my summer reading. It's right here.
You have the book with you, Joyce. Thanks so much. I'm deeply honored that you also have that book. And so this program is actually part of that encounter, and I'm really happy that the authorities of the Biblioteca Luis Angel Arango thought of this program, because it enables us also to build these bridges, cross-continental bridges. We are going to end with one last question, which usually it would come at the beginning, but I wanted us to reserve that for the end for quite interesting reasons. Who are your precursors? Which authors do you hold in high esteem that have, in one way or the other, influenced the way you write?
I would say that Chinua Achebe made me realize that we can tell our stories. When we read Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, Arrow of God, we could replace all the characters with people we knew. We knew old men in the village and old women who fit the characters. And so Chinua Achebe, and most importantly, his use of language. You know, he domesticated the English language and made it African. And so gave us all a way we could write and don't write as outsiders. So that is that. My aunt, Mrs. Ashu, she wrote Ayamo's Days at School. She wrote children's literature. She made me know that a Bayan woman like me can also write. Maya Angelou, in my later years, when I write poetry now, interestingly, it's Maya Angelou. Why? Because I want her poems are, in a way, everyday poems, but very poetic. You know, when you read it, you feel poetry, but everybody can pick it and read it and have an idea of what she's talking about. I don't want to write poems that people write and nod their head and say, wow, she's a PhD. No. I don't want that. So Maya Angelou gave me my voice. And then she also gets into taboo spaces. You know, she had a wide experience. So she was able to capture certain things and don't lose who she, did not lose her sense of being as a woman, as a singer, as a as somebody playful. And if I want any legacy for myself in my poetry, is that I want my poetry to attract the kind of people that Maya Angelou's poetry attracts. We study her in the university, but she's also used outside the university. So Maya Angelou's voice, it's the voice that I crave to be like.
Thanks very much, Joyce. And you also have a habit of course, writing poetry in paying homage to authors that have served as precursors to you. Of course, Chinua Achebe, of course, Maya Angelou, but one other key author to whom you pay homage actually is Bate Bissong from our homeland. Of course, that's a whole talk for another day.
And yes. Interestingly, with Bate Bissong, what endeared me to him is his activism. You know that his works are, that's another thing. You need dictionaries, and sometimes not dictionaries, because he creates words. So he inspires me more with he inspired me with his dedication to what is going on around him. You know, his desire, that craving, you could see that he was choking. The suffering of his people, you know, shackled him, and he was fighting to be free, or fighting to keep his people free. I like that, and I try to bring a little bit of that fire in.
Exactly.
My certainly exactly. not in his style, because our styles could not be different when it comes to choice of words and stuff. I want it accessible. BB is not accessible.
Of course, Joyce, I mean, you've talked about like 3 influences that are as diverse as one can imagine.
Yes.
Diversity, of course, comes out very clearly in your work, which is very versatile and multi-perspectival. So I want us to end, of course, with a poem, A Libation of Words for Maya Angelou. That is on page 8 of Beautiful Fire. Of course, it also symbolizes the connection between African and African American, as you talked about. But also, I want, for the benefit of our audience, to say that libation is a cultural rite that is mostly performed in most communities by the male folk. But here we have a woman, as her mother said, if she knew that she was going to be this way, she would have come with a penis. Yes, so you're going to do us this poem, A Libation of Words for Maya Angelou, and we're going to end there.
You know, I like the fact that you bring that aspect, because again, these are some of the ways in which I protest. You know, when I do a libation of words, I have libations here and there. I know that from my culture, it is men who do libation. But guess what? Out here, I said, I am by myself in my house. So what do? Where do I go find some Cameroonian man or African man to come and pour a libation to bless my children when they're going back to school? So I do it. And I'm going to do, I have water here, so I'm going to to do the libation, a libation of words for Maya Angelou. Maya Angelou, a Tantsingore, still you rise from the ashes of history, an ancestral presence visible to those who feel. Yes, the earth will not confine you. You, an Amazon, daughter of the sun, phenomenal woman. You who straddled the world in body and words. You who brought healing words to painful spaces. You who sang courageously from the cage. Your voice breaking free the hinges of our own cages. Today, we gather in your name, pouring a libation of words. My people say it best. Erongambo, erobansam, erere. The past was good. The future will be good too. May we forever measure our feet on your oversized footprints. Maya Angelou, Etantingore.
Thank you very much, Joyce Ash, for this wonderful interview with you, and for this wonderful end to that interview with this beautiful rendition of the poem by yourself in honor of Maya Angelou. Thanks again, and we hope this is not going to be the last engagements you will have with the Latino public. We're going to have, of course, many more activities and events that bring together our different cultures. Thanks to everyone for watching this interview, and stay tuned to other interviews with other African authors. And thanks to all of you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dr. Shang. Thank you, the organizers. It's a wonderful opportunity, and I look forward to a live interview, live engagement back in Colombia. I love Colombia. I found Africa in Colombia. Thank you.
Thank you.